Yarn that we use is always either acrylic yarn or you can use wool. It has to be 8 ply, not the really thick or the really fine wool. Usually I have 3mm needle. Some other people use the 3.25, or if you're a very tight knitter you might use a 3.5 size needle. So the knitting we do is all plain knitting, a straightforward garter stitch that we use.
I'm starting a bear from the beginning, so I've done one leg. I'm now going to knit the second leg. I'm just casting on 10 stitches. So when I cast on, I put this needle into the back of the stitch, bring it around and just continue on until I have 10 stitches. I'm now going to knit 28 rows, and that'll be the exact same as the first leg. My 2 legs now are exactly the same, so I'm going to knit across the whole row and join those 2 legs together. I've knit straight across the first 9 to the last stitch on this leg, and then I move the second leg across, and what I'm doing here to join them together so it's a nice neat join is I get the 2 pieces of wool together and I knit into the first and the last stitch together, and I have the 2 strands of wool behind and I knit around that needle, and I've taken off 2 stitches and I've put 2 stitches on, and now I just continue on knitting across the second leg with just 1 strand of wool, and you can see now how the 2 legs are very neatly joined together. When I knit, I will knit back and I'll show you how I pick up those 2 stitches so it looks neat. Now I've come across to where I joined the 2 legs together, and I'm just pulling those 2 stitches apart, knitting into 1 stitch and the second stitch separately, so they're just exactly even like all the other stitches. And I will now continue knitting, and I'm basically knitting his shorts. I've done his legs, his trousers, I've done the tops of his pants, and now I'm going to do the waist and the shirt. So I'm going to change the colour here. So what I'm doing is I just hold the 2 tails together, and when you do this, you just ensure that you've got the right side of your bear or the outside of your bear facing you, because the tail where you've joined them together is on the inside. Just continue with my new colour yarn, and I go right across the whole row, and you can see, that is the right side, so it's a nice neat finish. And on the inside of your bear, you can see that's the inside because you can see the yellow yarn underneath. What I do with the 2 tails here, I just tie them together in a knot. And what you end up doing with this yarn when you actually finish the bear, you use that tail to sew the bear up. So I will now continue on with the same colour for another 12 rows. Now is the time to actually knit his arms in. So it's just casting on, so you just put your needle into the back of the stitch, bring your yarn around and add it onto the needle. I add 10 stitches for his sleeve. So I now knit all the way across the top of that row right to the end. I've finished knitting all the way across that row, and I'm now going to cast on another 10 stitches for the other sleeve. So I will now go across that row, knit again that row. I've now just finished his shirt. You can see the arms have taken shape. So I'm now then going to cast off 10 stitches of the sleeve back to the neck, and I will continue knitting all the way to the end of that sleeve, and I'll turn it around. So I'm going to now cast off another 10 stitches back to here, and I'll have a sleeve just like I have on the other side. Just as a double check to see whether you've cast off enough stitches for the sleeve, I always check how many stitches I have left on my needle, and at this point you should have 20 stitches here. I'll just finish this to the end. It's now time to change the colour of the yarn to do his head. My recommendation is you use a lighter colour for the head, because you have to keep in mind when you embroider the facial features that's done in a black wool. It's really important that we actually have the faces looking like happy bears. And I'm just knitting across those 20 stitches to the very end, and I will continue knitting for 26 rows. And with these 2 tails, to keep them tight so that they remain together, I actually just tie a very small, firm knot.
I'm going to cast off the head. You just knit the first 2 stitches, and then you take the first stitch and you put it over the second stitch. And then at the last one, you have to pull this thread through. And that is another half of your teddy. So here we've got the 2 halves of the teddies. And as you can see, this is the good side, and then this is the not so good side, because you can see how you got that extra little color in here. We also make sure that we got plenty of long ends so that we can use those to sew them up. So what I'm doing now is I've put together the good sides. The first thing I will do is a little bit down the middle between the legs here, and on the other side there's another one between the legs, and I actually tie those together. And then I start at the bottom here, and I take this long bit and I start sewing. So you hold them together and you just over sew the stitches, and reasonably close together. You can keep the rows together so you get quite a nice firm stitch. And I'll do this till as far as the thread goes, and then I just go back down, fair way down, so that it doesn't slip out. And I snip the end off. And on the other side I do the same thing. On the inside you can hardly see that there is a seam, and there's no gaps or holes in there. That's the main thing. As you can see at the moment, there's a few gaps there. So I use these bits. You make sure that you secure this by going up and down a bit and make sure that all these gaps are filled up on both sides. One other tricky bit when you're sewing up is to make sure that you don't get any gaps under the arm. It doesn't have to be absolutely tight, but you have to make sure that small children can't get their fingers in and poke the stuffing out. We have now sewn up this teddy, but it's still inside out. And then there is this little bit. We're going to use that to make the neck, but I need to put it to the inside. And I have to turn the teddy around so that it's the right side outside. And then what I do is I run a finger or a thumb and push out the corners, and at the same time I double check to make sure that all the seams are quite neat and there's no gaps, particularly down here in the middle and under the arms. The stuffing that we use to stuff our bears is Dacron type filling. You take a lump and you start by filling them up. Now make sure that you push the filling quite down into the legs. So now with the arms, you've got to again make sure that you push it right to the ends. You have to be able to hold it up by one leg like that. To make the neck, I'm simply going to go round and pick up these stitches between the color, where the color changes, and I go up and down and up and down. Now I've come to the end where we started, and I tighten it up a little bit so you get a nice neat little neck, and I simply go through a couple of times, tighten it up. So now I'm going to sew up the head. You hold these cast off sides from both halves and you pick up the stitches and you make it a nice neat flat stitch. And if you do that right, then you know that you get to the end exactly with even sides. So when we get to the end, don't cut it off and don't work it in, because this bit that we've got left here, we're going to use that to make the ears.
The knitter has kindly left some wool here, yarn ready for doing the ears. So starting from the top there, to then count 5 rows, and then running stitches across those 4 rows, just matching it up side to side. Turn it round and go back filling in the gaps. Finish this off, making sure it's not going to pop out undone. Hide that end of wool, cut that off. Try to make the 2 sides match.
If the middle is on a lower bit, I go to the 1, 2, 3rd higher bit and I count 1, 2, 3, 4 down, and I go for the 5th, just below the 5th I stick the needle in, and go up underneath the fourth, so 1, 2, 3, 4 at the top. And then over 2 stitches, I actually do 3 if it's a small bear, or sometimes 4. From there, I go across equal number on the other side. So that's the third one and that's the third one there. And I'll do exactly the same over 2. From the fourth one, I go down the middle and I pick up this center bit on the same level, the same row that the bottom of the eyes are. Then I go 2 down, I make a triangle, and then to anchor it, I go through here, then I go down 1 line here to make the mouth. 1 row down, so 1 stitch across, 1 row up, 1 stitch across. So that's both the down ones, obviously. 1, 2, and you go back up there and go the other way. Yeah, 1 down, 1 up, and then you go back to this one. And now I'm joining up the mouth to the nose because that anchors it a bit. Poke it right down here, go through to the back, and then we cut this.
Now for the very important part, putting on the label, which is done in at the finishing school or at your local Red Cross group who do your trauma teddies. Ears, check. Face, happy, big smiley face. Just checking there are no holes that small fingers can get them into, like in the crotch or under their arms. And no, it's all looking good. Ready for the label. Well, he's now ready to go on duty to some child somewhere in Australia. So thanks so much for all your help and enjoy.